Hello, it is Meg Linehan, and welcome to Full Time with me, Meg Linehan. All right, 2025 NWSL season is somehow nearly upon us. So, over the next 2 weeks, to get everyone up to speed, we are going to be breaking down all 14 clubs in our two-part NWSL season preview here on Full Time, featuring some special guest panelists. So, coming up in this episode, I will be joined by two guests to break down the 7 teams in what we have dubbed the NWSL East. Maybe at some point we'll get conferences or divisions, who knows. If we're expanding to 30 plus teams, apparently they gotta come in some form. And then in next week, we're going to be focusing on the other 7 teams in the NWSL quote-unquote West. We're going to be staying, though, in the East to kick off, so we had to invite back onto the show for her second appearance, NWSL broadcaster, former goalkeeper for the U.S. Women's National Team, Sky Blue, and the Chicago Red Stars, New Jersey's own, Jill Loydon. And alongside Jill, we will also be joined by staff writer for USA Today's Pro Soccer Wire, NWSL Media OG, and intrepid reporter from Maryland, deep in the heart of soccer in the district, Jason Anderson. But as an appetizer, just like where this falls on the schedule, Jason and I are also going to be previewing the 2025 NWSL Challenge Cup, which is going to see the Orlando Pride take on the Washington Spirit in a rematch of the 2024 Championship. We are going to be trying to answer the question, what is the Challenge Cup, truly? In the year of our Lord, 2025, what is the Challenge Cup? What does it mean? Does it mean something to the players? Does it mean something to the league? We're going to find out. I don't know if we got the answer. That's a whole lot of show to get to, though. And since it's just me here at the start of things, I want to run down some of the biggest soccer stories of the week. And where else could we start but Nuevo Leon, Mexico, with the goal that has broken the internet. Yes, of course, I'm talking about Jackie Ovalle for Tigres off the Jenny Hermoso assist against Chivas in Liga MX Femenil. Whew.
Rescata el balón y lo mantiene en el rectángulo verde. Va al primer palo, el remate, golazo, golazo,
All right, I know a goal is big when I see friends who are not part of the soccer world sharing the highlight, and that has absolutely, the threshold has been crossed. This goal has broken containment. I mostly feel bad for everyone who is trying to also score goals in women's professional soccer, because if this goal does not win the second edition of the Marta Award, just named, Marta won the first one, Ovalle's name is all over award number 2, unless somehow someone breaks the laws of physics in an even more absurd way, which you cannot be more ridiculous than this goal. It feels unimaginable. It just, there are no words. But somehow, if you want even more on this instant classic goal, the stuff of legends, this goal is going to be following her for the rest of her life, and that is not a bad thing in this case. Eduardo Tansley has a breakdown on The Athletic of what he's calling an adapted scorpion kick. It's so good that we don't even have words for it, a term for it. Is it a scorpion kick? We haven't really decided. All right, on Monday, Yuki Nagasato announced her retirement from soccer after 23 years. The former World Cup winner with Japan made her professional debut for Nippon TV Belize in her native Japan at 15 years old, had distinguished stints with Frankfurt and Chelsea in Europe, and now hangs up her cleats after playing the 2024 season with the Houston Dash. To all the fans who supported me, whether in the stands or from afar, your support pushed me forward. To my teammates, coaches, staff, and family, thank you for shaping me into the person I am today. Even in the toughest times, your belief in me gave me strength. I was never alone, and for that, I'm truly grateful. Retiring wasn't an easy decision, but I'm excited for what's next. I will continue to be involved in football, finding new ways to help the game grow. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. That was Yuki Nagasato in her retirement post. And for NWSL fans, I almost don't have words for what Yuki has meant to the NWSL and to the women's game in general, because if you weren't around for the height of her career with the Chicago Red Stars between 2017 and 2021, it's almost hard to describe her partnership with Sam Kerr. Just a complete playmaker, serving up these beautiful balls for Sam Kerr to finish. And It's also hard to think of, like, a player that has been more universally beloved than Yuki too. Like, obviously, there's a whole class of players like this, but Yuki's really up there. Drummer, just her vibes, immaculate. We will definitely miss her in the NWSL, to say the least. All right. And on Wednesday, the FIFA Council approved the new plan for the Women's Club World Cup with the inaugural tournament now set for 2028. The Athletics' Matt Slater originally had this story ahead of the FIFA Council because stakeholders in the women's game were saying, hey, we need some more time to get this right. It's still going to be a 16-team tournament held every 4 years. And while the host and the dates of the 2028 edition are still TBD, we do know two big things. One, they have decided to put it in Olympic year. Very interesting on what implications that might have down the line. But they've also figured out how to allocate the spots in the tournament, at least for the 2028 edition. It may change after this. So UEFA, Europe, is going to get 5 direct slots into the Club World Cup, while most other confederations, including CONCACAF, which the NWSL is a part of, is only going to get 2. And poor Oceania actually has 0 direct qualifying slots into the group stage, only a single play-in slot. In the meantime, though, FIFA has also introduced a smaller annual tournament to fill out the rest of this 4-year cycle. So starting in 2026 now, there will be a FIFA Women's Champions Cup. I don't hold out hope for being able to keep the name of all of these smaller tournaments straight in your head. It's going to be really hard. I just want to warn you of that right now. This one is 6 teams only, all 6 winners of their respective confederation championship. So basically think of it as a UEFA Champions League winner versus whoever might win CONCACAF's new Club Champions Cup tournament, which also, as a reminder, is going to take place in May, with Portland Thorns facing off against Tigres and Gotham FC facing off against America Femenil in the 2 semifinals. Tigres is going to have a home advantage too. So that's going to happen in 26, 27, and 29, with the Club World Cup itself happening in 2028. There is so much we do not know about all of this yet, but for what we do know, Matt Slater and I have you covered with an explainer at The Athletic. It's going to be a lot more effective for you to read that rather than me to keep talking at you on this podcast. WNBA star Sabrina Ionescu has joined Bay FC as a new minority owner and commercial advisor. Now, usually celebrities joining an ownership group as a minority investor isn't honestly all that interesting, but the second part of this announcement is honestly kind of fascinating because it could allow Ionescu to leverage her skills as this very visible and commercial WNBA star to the NWSL club and its players. So the WNBA champion and Olympic champion was born and raised in the Bay Area and no doubt has a personal connection to seeing Bay FC thrive on and off the pitch. And also with Sue Bird as a minority investor in Gotham FC, Aaliyah Edwards leading chants in the stands at Spirits Game, and Cheryl Swoops helping the Dash launch their new kit. Like, we are starting to see this crossover more and more with the WNBA and NWSL. Obviously, Portland leading that charge with a shared ownership group. All right, and some breaking news on Wednesday was Sophia Wilson announcing that she is pregnant with her first child with her husband. So first of all, congrats to Sophia Wilson. We will be talking about the NWSL West next week, so we will have a full week to consider what this means for Portland Thorns heading into the 2025 season. But of course, some great news for Sophia Wilson. Very happy for her. All right, that was so much. And finally, if you are subscribed to this very podcast, as I hope you are, you have probably noticed an extra podcast in your feed this week. In collaboration with the Athletic FC, we released a special podcast last week titled It's Over, the Trial of Luis Rubiales. The audio documentary covers the aftermath of the scandal involving the former Spanish Football Federation president, Luis Rubiales. From the pitch in Sydney to the hills of South Spain, over the courtroom of Madrid, it's a story. You can go have a listen to it now on your feed in Full Time with Meg Linehan. That's available right now. All right, we will be back after this looking ahead to the 2025 Challenge Cup and previewing the NWSL East. All right, I am now joined by Jason Anderson. And Jason, we're going to get momentarily into like real previews of Orlando and Washington, but I do want to take a beat for the Challenge Cup. Obviously, you know, the Challenge Cup has changed drastically since our first introduction to it. There is no playground in this edition, But I just want to let's take a gut check in terms of what this trophy game is now offering the NWSL, because I think it is very different, right, from how this was originally incorporated into the league. It's now a one-off game. I mean, do you think it still serves a purpose for the NWSL?
To some degree. It sort of announces that we're here, that this is sort of like the season is starting, but it's not really starting. I like it. I'm gonna have to write, like I've already had to write a couple of things where I'm including a little segment that's like, what is the Challenge Cup? And it's like, okay, it used to be this, then it became this other thing, but no one was happy with that either, and now it's just this sort of one-off.
Yep.
It is something that's done elsewhere. A few other countries abroad have this set up. England famously, on the men's side, they have the Community Shield. It is a game with a trophy, so that's something. But it's also a one-off game that happens before your regular season starts, and that kind of, you can't separate those two things. You can't pull them apart. So I think it serves some kind of purpose as a sort of like, let's focus, the season's starting, let's get it together. And that's kind of it. It's fine for what it is. I don't really have a problem that it's still going. But it does feel kind of like a weird contractual remnant that we're just sort of gonna have for a while. And that's fine. It's not the end of the world. We've got bigger problems.
Yeah. Totally.
In women's soccer. So
that.
I'm like, you know what? If this is gonna keep happening, that's fine. And
I mean, it is interesting to me in terms of like, you would think that the NWSL would look at this as kind of an event, right? And I think we're starting to see that a little bit more as this has shifted into its current form, because first of all, you can know the date pretty early. You know that in theory, whoever the top seed is, in this case, we knew it was going to be in Orlando. You can turn this into that sort of companion event at the start of the season to the championship. But the problem is, I think, because the stakes do not feel nearly as high as the championship, turning it into the same sort of, matching event in terms of fans, in terms of only yes, only two teams are involved in both, but it's just like, it doesn't have the same oomph to it.
Yes.
That a
and
championship ever would.
There's not really a way to fake that either. I think down the road, if the league becomes as popular as it could, then maybe this does start to become like that idea of like, let's get together for this thing, right? The draft used to have that because we're kind of culturally in sports, we're used to that being a sort of, hey, the teams are back.
We have to do this again.
Yeah. And the substitute for that on the media side was quite useful, in my opinion. I was out in LA to go to that media day event, and it was very useful, but fans are only getting some stories out of it. They're not getting a game. There were no games played. There were dogs present. The players were excited about that, but no one could come see that. So I think down the road we could see fans, more fans as the league gets more popular. You have a chunk of people who are like, I'm going to go to Orlando, or next season I'm going to go to Kansas City or Seattle or wherever it is. I'm going to go to that. It's a destination game. I don't think right now it has that, in part because we are on iteration like 3 or 4 of the Challenge Cup.
Yeah, it feels like 2.1.
And a lot of those past experiences were negative.
Yes.
The first Challenge Cup seemed unbearably bleak for a lot of the people that were in that bubble. 21 and 22, everyone was deeply unhappy with the format, the preseason nature of it. So we're in a weird space with trying to figure out what this thing even is still. You and I have had this conversation before about what is the Challenge Cup. I think this is probably the best that can be done with it at this point in time. The preseason tournament we had in the past was not a good idea. It did not work. Everyone was unhappy. And then on top of that, we had like that championship, that game between the Courage and the Spirit was like physically just... It wasn't that teams are playing physically brutal. It just like really bad stuff kept happening. So yeah, I think this is about where it is going to be for a little while. And it's not the end of the world. It's fine if we have a little bit of a like, what are we doing with this? It's not so bad.
Yeah, not the NWSL's number one problem by any stretch. Maybe
Right.
a rename in the works. But Jason, I know you just talked about being at the league's media day. You were also at the Washington Spirit media day. I mean, do you get the sense that players, this is a trophy that they want?
I will say I was surprised to hear Jonah Giraldes said this of Aubrey Kingsbury. I mean, granted, if you tell Aubrey Kingsbury you're competing over anything, she is immediately like, I am going to win this. I am going to defeat you. And so, yeah, the leadership at the Spirit, the veteran players there that we spoke to at this Fan Fest event that doubled as a media event, they want to win it. Some of it, depending on who you talk to, some of it was like, we still feel like we could have played better against Orlando. We kind of let them get away with one in the championship, and we know this won't take the trophy from them and bring it to here, but it will feel pretty good if we could beat them. Some of it was maybe oriented more towards, we're a club that wants to win trophies. There's a trophy in this game. Let's win the trophy. So I think they are taking it pretty seriously, which is in contrast if you think last year to when Giraldes arrived. They had the friendly against Arsenal. They had a couple other the Summer Cup games. And Giraldes was very much like, all of this is preparation for our regular season game against Kansas City. He spent like a full month saying that over and over. And then they did beat Kansas City 4-1. So he did get the payoff at the end, but he spent a lot of time being like, these friendly games are all training sessions. And so for this game to be a little more like, there is a trophy, we should go win the trophy, and that's coming from him, it does speak to, maybe the teams are sort of tricking themselves into that, like, let's get the competitive fires going now before the points actually start to count. But yeah, I was fascinated by the fact that a bunch of the players were like, yeah, we want to win this thing, and not just because it would be nice or whatever. It was like, there's a trophy. Let's go get it.
Yeah.
The Spirit have one trophy. So I do agree with them on some level of like, hey, let's win some trophies. Like, we want to be the best team in the world. You got to win. You have to win trophies. So if you're Barcelona, you win the Spanish Super Cup or whatever smaller trophies get put out there. If you're the Spirit and you talk a big game, and the Spirit talk a big game, if nothing else, they are always talking a big game. To their credit, I think it's great that the league has more teams doing that. But yeah, I think they want to win this pretty substantially, which I was not necessarily expecting.
Yeah. I mean, I also do think Orlando Pride is about to get something out of this too. Obviously, having won the Shield, having won the championship, this is a chance for them to kind of get that opening moment, host the game, hoist a banner somewhere in the stadium, I'm sure, and get their little victory lap. And hopefully, I mean, what will be interesting is obviously we had San Diego against Gotham in 2024, which actually, of all things, as our research turned up, was Alex Morgan's final goal.
Yes.
Her final goal, winning Challenge Cup for the Wave in 2024. So hopefully, we don't necessarily get a repeat of that in terms of like trivia fact. But
Right.
yeah, I do think Challenge Cup is going to be one of those things as we move forward that is still a malleable object in terms
Sure.
of timing, in terms of identity, in terms of what does it actually offer the NWSL and its players. And I don't know. I don't think we have a final answer yet.
No, it's probably going to be a little while. And I don't know this for a fact, but I mean, the broadcast deal has 3 more years in it. I suspect that there is something in that contract that says you owe us a Challenge Cup, so you
One
gotta
Challenge
put
Cup
one on.
game, please. Yep.
Yes, so at least 2 more. If there aren't 2 more beyond March 7th, then I would be stunned. After that, who knows? This
Yeah.
league is always tinkering around the edges. So we'll see. If they decide maybe it can become that destination, then I would imagine it stays. And if it doesn't, then its long-term future. If it does, if we're 2 years from now also saying these exact same things about like what is this thing exactly, then that might be it for the Challenge Cup.
Then
After
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And
So
that
we'll
would
put a
also
pin
be
in it.
fine.
Yeah. All right, we'll put a pin in it. We'll be right back after this with Jill Loydon and our preview of the quote-unquote East Division of the NWSL. All right, Jason and Jill, we have a real project ahead of us previewing the East. Obviously, we need to start with the top team of 2024, the Orlando Pride, won the Shield, won the final, not a lot of turnover. Jill, maybe let's start with you on Orlando. Should we be expecting the same thing out of them again in 2025? Is this a back-to-back sort of team?
I think there were three real things that made this Orlando Pride team a formidable opponent last year. One, it was their versatility with Seb Hines and his ability to choose a strategy for each individual game. And that kind of leads us to number two is they just found ways to win every single game. They were in every single game, whether they were breaking down a lower block or teams that decided to sit back. And I think it was Bay at one point did that against them. And every team kind of rejigged their defensive posture. And Orlando found a way every game to be in the game and win the game and score in a multitude of different ways, whether it was shots from distance through traffic or going around teams. They just found ways to win. And even looking at the final, I mean, they completely were like, here, Spirit, have the ball. We don't need the ball in order to win this game. We're happy to sit in our defensive posture and defend you because we know that you're actually better when you don't have the ball. So I thought Seb Hines led that really, really well. And then the last point kind of revolves around Seb Hines as well, but there's such a depth to this team in terms of players that necessarily aren't playing the nominal roles that they're used to, but finding their super strengths within different roles. And then Seb Hines using those players almost like horses for courses against different types of opponents. And he's getting the best out of players like an Allie Watt, Summer Yates, as well as Corey Dyke playing completely out of position at the right back.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing that we've seen from Orlando Pride in this offseason is there have not really been a huge amount of changes to this roster. Obviously, Marta re-signing for another 2 years. That was kind of the big question for them. I remember kind of cornering general manager Haley Carter at the championship and her being like, are you going to ask me about Marta's contract? And I was like, no, Haley, you're safe for right now. You're safe. Jason, what are you thinking in terms of, I don't know if we've seen like across the board a huge amount of like, we have not kind of seen massive trades that, or like, the snow globe being turned upside down and shaken. So is this roster strong enough from last season to carry them through 2025? Or do you think we're going to be seeing some other big changes for Orlando, maybe another big piece coming in?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they have something cooking, but I kind of think, to Jill's point, like last season, they were able to do all of these different things based on the opponent. And some of it was down to a lot of their players were playing at like a 9 or a 10 out of 10. They're maxing themselves out, which is to Seb Hines' credit. It's the organization's credit that they were in that position. That is really tough to do year over year. And I do think adding another piece might just sort of add a little more competition internally to sort of re-spark that and give them a better platform to do it again, because I think a lot of their games were close. And if they come from everyone's at a 9 or a 10 to like everyone's at a 7.5, all of a sudden those close games, some of them are draws, and sometimes you're talking, okay, we're topping 60 points in 2024, and maybe that becomes 55 or 50 once a few of those games start being draws. So I do think maybe there's something to one more piece somewhere. It's not probably in the attack. I think they're fine there, though Adriana's departure does leave me, it's a little, I think they're okay. I think Summer Yates can step in and take over that extra responsibility without the issue. But would I want to add one more if I were them? Yeah, I think I would.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like probably most NWSL teams are always going to be like, do we need one more? The Oceans, sort of, do we need one more? We need one more, right? Like, that's probably the conversation happening in most front offices. But what is interesting for the Pride is, obviously Adriana out, going to the Saudi Pro League, which is kind of a very interesting transfer out of the NWSL this offseason that was not in the same conversation as a lot of other transfers out. But you think about Grace Chanda coming off of the season ending injury list on Wednesday morning. Simone Charlie coming back, will be fit again. So they are almost getting some of those pieces back that they've had the whole time that they've just been waiting for. Do you think that's enough, Jason, or is that's still the vibe? We need one more.
Right. We don't know exactly what Chanda's going to look like in the league yet, but we've seen her play internationally. I think there's a reason they signed her. It wasn't a let's take a flyer and see how this goes. But yeah, I think those two, I think that's a really good point, that maybe Haley Carter would be listening to what I was saying and be like, well, we don't need to do that. We already have them. You just have to be a little patient. And maybe that's all it is. Those are two, talented players that could end up causing that sort of positive friction within the team that ends up lifting them back to what they did last year, which was historic. Last season was amazing for them. They almost could not lose. So if that's the case, then it's, potential for Pride just running it back is pretty high. If it's not, then I do kind of wonder if they're like team 3 instead of a top 3. It's like a top 2 and then 1.
Okay, interesting. All right. Jason, I want to stay with you because obviously you are the Washington Spirit guru. And
I hope so.
For me, the Washington Spirit are really interesting because they obviously finished second. Orlando were in kind of a category of their own, but Washington really did come through. But their story heading into this season, I think, is kind of an interesting one because, again, injuries they were the story of the back half of 2024. We're looking to see when Corey Bethune is going to come back. Andy Sullivan obviously will be missing for 2025. There have been some incoming players. What is your, just like real quick, because I want to get to Jill too, but like what is your vibe around the Spirit heading into 2025 right now?
I think they're in position to do roughly what they did last year, which is contend for everything. Rebecca Bernal is going to add that internal competition. That's a perfect example where they have an England international in that position. They said, let's go get one of the best players in Mexico's national team to compete for that spot. That's the idea. To your point, Corey Bethune, I think her injury recovery timeline was supposed to be day 1 of regular season, be able to play. That was back in October, November. Now it sounds like maybe that's a couple weeks early is what it's sounding like. They haven't committed. Jonah Heraldez last weekend was like, well, I don't want to say anything. We've got a few training sessions to get through before I start making any pronouncements about this across the team. But yeah, I think they're mostly healthy. They're deep. This is a team where McKenna Morris, if everyone's healthy, doesn't have that many minutes in the attack at least, which is kind of wild. So yeah, I think they're going to be very, very good once again. Narumi Mira is an excellent addition to solve for Sullivan's absence. It allows them to go back to playing. I think they want to go playing 4-2-3-1 again after playing 4-3-3 once Sullivan was out and Bethune was out. I think they want to go back to that. And yeah, I think they're going to be an excellent team. The standard is very high, and I think they expect themselves to. I don't think that they think it's a reach.
Jill, what did the Spirit have to do to unseat Orlando Pride?
I think the Spirit are going to be a very competitive team. I think they're going to start where they finished off last season. I think in order to improve this, when you look back at the composition of their goals from last year, they scored 51 goals. 40 of those were in the run of play, and of those 40, 23 were in transition. And I think that's where they really were able to shine last season, is when they were able to sit back, allow their opponent to be in a bit of a bigger expansive shape, create those turnovers, and then feast on the mistakes of their opponents. But my real question for them is, can they break teams down that sit in a bit of a more defensive posture where they get a lot of numbers back behind the ball? That's what Seb Hines did well in the final. He figured that out. That was his strategy going into the game and made it difficult for Spirit to break them down. So as the season progresses, can they rely on what's made them successful, but also add in a bit more patience and maybe tempo in the final third?
Jill, do you think they rely too much on Trinity Rodman? I mean, I think what is interesting about Trinity is she's had basically the whole offseason off, right? Not a lot of play on the U.S. Women's National Team. I think her health has always been kind of the number one concern, right, with Trinity. How do they like build around that, knowing that how important she is to the team, how she can score goals kind of at will, and knowing like, okay, we've got to make sure that she's available a full season, that she can still meet her national team obligations too?
Well, I think it comes down to the success of the pieces around her, which is, I think, in the beginning of the season, why Trinity was so much more effective in the beginning of the year, because she had a Croy Bethune and an Ule Sarr to grab some of the attention. And so defenses then knew that they couldn't go player for player with potentially Saar and leave Trinity Rodman then isolated where she could cause a lot of damage. So I think it is bound to the relationships around Rodman that are going to make her more successful. If those pieces are doing well, that's going to leave more space for Trinity to get into those 1v1 isolated moments or look to combine and get behind teams. And yeah, I see the most smiles out of Trinity Rodman when she's playing in combination with other people, not just by herself.
Yeah, great point. All right, let's move on to Gotham. Gotham has had arguably the most interesting offseason of any team in this league. This will not be a complete list of departures, but Crystal Dunn, Lynn Biondolo, Sam Hyatt, Yasmin Ryan, Delaney Sheehan, Jenna Niswanger going to Arsenal. Like, a lot of turnover for this team. There have been some signings back in, a lot of kids. Jason, what are we thinking for Gotham heading in to 2020? Are they just a giant question mark right now?
To a certain extent, I think it's interesting that of the names you're pulling out of that team, I think that the player that maybe I'm the most curious about what they're going to do is Delaney Sheehan, who flies under the radar so much, and doesn't get the sort of national team kind of talk that the other players that left did, or some of the other players that left did. But Juan Carlos Amoros really, like, as soon as he got there, was like, this is a player my midfield is going to build around. She is going to be a reference point in all phases of the game, and she kind of held that spot against, players that on paper it seems like, okay, that's a more talented player, that's a player whose ceiling is higher, and yet the things Sheehan was able to do in terms of soccer IQ, in terms of reading the game, in terms of just being a sort of fulcrum in possession as a player that allows other players to go do other stuff. I don't know that he has a replacement in mind. I'm sure he does, but I'm sure it's also going to be like, we have to change some things because it's not going to work if we just plug somebody else in. And there's the vibes question that has been plaguing them all off season. And that is the mystery, is who knows, because it seemed for much of the year like, oh yeah, they're contending, they're piling up points, everyone seems happy, and then all of a sudden towards the end it was like, well, maybe people aren't so happy.
Maybe that's not what's
and then then a bunch of them bounced. So who knows? If they are happy, then yeah, this is a massively talented team once again. If they are a little unhappy, then I don't know if they're keeping up at the very top. I think then they get into, playoff team. Yes, I think that's an easy one, but like how high up? This is the question, is the vibes thing.
Yeah. Jill, when you look at Gotham, I mean, one of the players who obviously won Goalkeeper of the Year, Anne-Katrine Berger, how much of a difference can she play for? Is she potentially a pivot point for them where they are a contender or they're not?
I think there's three. We're in this era where the team and the chemistry within the team is bigger than the individual. Although as media and pundits, we kind of pipe up and we, bolster the individual, it really is about the team. However, with that being said, I think there's three players in our league that if you're missing one of those players, then that team completely is transformed. I think those three players are Sophia Wilson at Portland, Mal Swanson in Chicago, and Anne-Katrine Berger for Gotham. Because at Gotham, for your goalkeeper is the base in which you can play from. It is the base in which your strategy starts from at Gotham in the way that Juan Carlos wants to play, because they play that high pressing, really high center backs, and they leave themselves exposed in the space behind those two center backs. And Anne-Katrine Berger fit this Gotham team like a glove because of her preventative positioning, her high vertical positioning, her ability to solve pressure in the build out. Obviously a fantastic shot stopper, really difficult to beat. It felt like when she came to the team, things kind of started to turn in their way a little bit more. I think that controlled chaos is really difficult to play as a goalkeeper to play. It is high risk, very high reward. And I thought last season Gotham had the strongest goalkeeper environment, and they let Cassie Miller go. They let Abby Smith go. Michelle Betos retires. Now you're completely changing the complexion of your goalkeeper environment. And I think without Anne-Katrine Berger, Shelby Hogan is not the same type of goalkeeper. She is not that high off your line, preventative type who is very good with the ball at their feet. And I think that could be a big difference for this Gotham team this season.
Yeah, love that. Thank you, Jill. That's some great stuff to watch for. I want to move on to Kansas City Current, who obviously, they got a lot of headlines last year. The stadium helped a lot. They had some really great performances. Probably more goals allowed than Vlatko Andonovski would ever want. Jason, maybe let's start there. Is that goal, like Temwa Chwenga obviously getting a whole bunch of headlines. She can score at will. We've seen players get a little more challenged second year in the league. I think maybe teams are going to have now experienced the Temwa Chwenga experience. So how important is it for her to keep scoring? How important is it for KC to prevent goals at a higher rate than what happened in 2024?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say Vlatko probably spent most of the offseason thinking about how can we get some shutouts. The 5-4 game was a lot of fun, but I'm sure he was like, this gave me nightmares.
Yeah, he's haunted by that for sure.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I think some of that is going to be Claire Hutton takes a step from 18 to 19. That changes things for them. That adds. She's already playing at a high level, and you add a year of experience to that. That's going to help a lot. But I do kind of wonder if they maybe needed another defensive addition to help with that, because they ended up, it was interesting to watch them because they would end up defending in isolation when I don't think they intended to take that risk. I think they ended up taking that risk in games where it was kind of like, how did we end up in this situation? And the flip side of it was with Chwenga, with Dabinia, with Bia when she was healthy, which if she's healthy all year, watch out for Kansas City. With all those players, it was like, well, what we're risking, we're getting back in the attack, so it's okay. But that's not Vlatko's game. Vlatko is not a let me roll the dice kind of coach. He's a I want my shutouts type of guy. And yeah, I think that some of it will be a systemic change. I think they are going to be a little more calculated. They are maybe going to also have to rotate a little more as some of their veteran midfielders, it's 1 year later. So they are going to have to find a way to pepper in some minutes mid-season to sort of take the pressure off of them so that when it comes down to the stretch and the playoffs, those players are at 100%. So that's an interesting challenge, but I still think Kansas City is I think them and the Spirit are, to me, the two most likely finalists. It's just, can they find a way to still be as dangerous or close to as dangerous without giving up so much at the back?
Yeah. Jill, do you agree? Is the ceiling for KC championship?
I think for me, they're going to be the Shield winners. That's my pick. That's my prediction. I think this team, this roster is steeped in quality in almost every position on the field. I don't worry about their attacking production at all. I think, Chwenga obviously is getting better from moving from game to game. She's getting stronger and adapting to how teams are defending her. And I even think, if she has an off game or a little stretch where she's not scoring, they still have players Bia, who I think arguably, if she was healthy, would be one of the best players in the league. Dabinia, DiBernardo, who's playing at the ceiling of her NWSL career at this moment. Lola Bonta, Michelle Cooper, who found a home out right on the right. I think they played in a more considered manner. When thinking back to last year, it was entertaining and they were scoring a lot of goals. And Vlatko said, we just want to score. We want to score goals. And it was entertaining for sure, but it was almost to their detriment. But I think there was a turning point for them last season when they played Portland and they won 4-1. And they bossed that game in every single facet of the game. But it wasn't they were forcing goals. They weren't. They were playing more reserved. They were playing more considered. They were playing more conservative. So they went to goal for sure, and they scored a ton of goals. But it wasn't every single time that left them so defensively vulnerable, which we saw earlier on in the season. I'm not quite sold on Lorena, their new goalkeeper. But looking back to the regular season, they went 6-0-2 to finish off the regular season, and they only conceded 3 goals. So they were much more difficult for opponents to break down. And I think that's a platform that they're going to use to launch this season as well.
All right, let's move on to North Carolina. The Courage are, I think, probably arguably one of the most interesting teams in the league of where they stand. We obviously know North Carolina has had this tradition of excellence. Jaden Shaw in one of the biggest moves this offseason. Jill, what do you think Jaden Shaw adds to the card, also knowing that Caroline has departed for Manchester?
Well, I think when you look back at this North Carolina team, Sean Nahas has completely changed the complexion of this team in the last few years. And I think everyone would mostly agree that they're one of the best footballing teams in the league, but maybe not the most feared footballing team in the league. I think that they have a very controlled way of playing in their build out and meticulously being able to build into good areas of the field, but then kind of get caught like in this horseshoe around the top of the 18 where they're moving the ball side to side. They're getting into good positions, but they're not really penetrating their opponent. And I think the ability with Jaden Shaw to work off of Sanchez, I'm really curious to see where Shaw is going to land on the field and which position to start out in and how she can be used most effectively to play off of Sanchez, whether they're going to keep her in a kind of a Caroline position and keep her out wide, or if they're going to let her come inside, or whether she's just a player who is just able to find the space, almost like Tess Bodie was a few years ago. But the real question marks is can Sean Nahas get Jaden Shaw to work on both sides of the ball consistently week in and week out? We know that she is so creative and can just do magic on the attacking side of the ball, but is she going to commit that same kind of effort to the defensive side of the ball? Because North Carolina is a good defensive team at the heart of it.
Obviously, been a huge part of their identity. I mean, I think back to that, midfield of Sam Ewis, Crystal Dunn, Denise O'Sullivan, obviously, a key part. She hasn't gone anywhere. All right, Jason, let's move on to Chicago. I know Jill already brought up Mal Swanson's name. She is a TBD for the start of the season. We don't know the status. We don't know Sam Staub's return date yet. Natalie Kuika just picked up an injury. Not a lot of changes for Chicago on their roster build. Anyway, should we be worried about the Chicago, not Red Stars, Chicago Stars FC?
I would say, a little bit. I'm kind of shocked that their offseason was so quiet. This was a team that needed to, I think, build on the progress made last year. It's not to say they did nothing, but they didn't do enough, in my opinion. And like you said, Sam Staub is going to be out for a chunk of the season before she's recovered from last year's Achilles injury. Kuika, I don't know the timeline for her, but that's a big problem to take those two players out of that team and not have an obvious, let's plug this player in and we're not going to lose very much. I'm a little worried for Chicago, especially, Swanson. We have no idea how long that situation, whatever it may be. Hopefully it's nothing too serious. Whatever's going on there, that's a lot of talent. I don't know that there's a team in the league that could be without players of that caliber and not take a really big dip as a result. That's just how good those three are. So, I'm a little worried for Chicago because they were already a team that kind of had to scratch and claw their way through games. They piled up some points early last season, and that is what got them into the playoffs ultimately is a few, coin flip kind of results that they happened to pull out the win in weeks, 1 through 5. They only got in the playoffs by a small margin. They just sort of held on and just barely managed to get in. They did not have the margin for error to be without players of this caliber. So I want to know why Chicago hasn't been more aggressive. Maybe they're following a Utah plan where they're like in the summer window. Some of these players that we have in mind will be available, but they're not right now. But without that information, we're just speculating. It's a puzzle to me for them.
Yeah, no, Chicago's definitely an interesting one. All right, let's wrap up. Back to both of us, both of you. Racing Louisville FC, to me, I mean, the big question here, Jill, has to be, is this the year where they finally make the leap? Are you seeing something that should be encouraging fans of racing, that this is the year where the leap gets made?
Are we opening more teams to the playoffs? That would be, if we are, then maybe Racing gets in. But it feels like, Last year, I was so excited about this racing team with Bev Yanez at the helm and just a clean slate. It seemed like she had a different vision for the way that this racing team could play. They wanted to be a more in possession, dominant team. They've added some pieces with Janine Becky and Bethany Balser, and it just never felt like it started to click. Things started to gel. And you could kind of see their identity shifting from week to week without real consistency at the end of the year where they're trying to scrape points. And listen, they have a lot of great individuals. And, you know, if you look at their midfield between Ari Borges, Taylor Flint, Sav DeMello, you know, Kayla Fisher spends some time in there, you would think like, wow, they've got one of the best midfields in the league. But it just doesn't always translate to results and success within this league. So I'm kind of curious about how they can use some of those individuals and enhance those individuals, whether, you know, they're more difficult to break down. I think letting Abby Ursig go could be something that's used in their benefit, although she was a very reliable defender. I don't think she helped much on the attacking side of the ball, which put Katie Lund in some really difficult spots last year. So yeah, I am very curious about how this racing team is going to play and how they can get the best out of some of those individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I think the midfield that you named, it was funny while we were doing research for this episode. Our producer Theo and I were like looking at the roster and kind of being like, "Ooh, this roster." And then we got to the midfield section. And we were like, "Oh no, like the midfield. Okay, there's something here." Jason, I mean, yes, the question is Louisville can make the leap. I mean, you look at the coaching staff here, Bev Yanez, Carm Moscato, right? Like you think the two of them really should be taking this team to another level. I mean, should we be? What's the fear level here? Maybe for the two of them.
I mean, given that last year the talent was there and it never quite translated, maybe that's a year one as a head coach for Bev, kind of getting that all to cohere. They made some trades midseason that sort of radically changed a lot of how they wanted to attack. I would like, if you have a midfield like they have, I would like to see a team like that exert a lot more control on games from a tempo perspective, from a territorial perspective. A lot of their games just felt kind of like it could go either way. And I feel like when you build the way they're built, that shouldn't be the feeling. I think maybe they would like to, and maybe it was just unclear how to leverage their midfield in a better way. But I think that has to be the thing that they're doing this year, is just how are we taking this, like we've got all these good ingredients, we got to be able to put together a good meal at the end of the day. And sometimes last year they were like, yeah, that wasn't bad. But even when they were winning, it was like, you know, this game could have gone either way. And I don't think that should be the case. I think they have the tools to exert a little more control, and it's just been a little out of reach for them. So if they can find that, if they found some path there this winter, then that's great. If it's more of the same on the field, then the results are going to be, you know, the forever ninth thing might continue, because they're not going to be bad, but can they step up in a league where the top teams are getting better? This is a league that is no longer the ceiling is where it is. It's now every season it's going up a little bit. So that is the challenge to them, is they have to catch up. And I don't know. Unfortunately for Louisville fans, I feel like another ninth place kind of starts to add up to me.
Yeah. All right. I know that both of you are pretty high. Like we kind of got a sense through this conversation of what teams you think are going to be really good. What teams, just to wrap this up, what team are you like most excited to watch in terms of like sheer unpredictability, NWSL chaos, that sort of vibe? Jill, go for it.
Well, I guess my two choices would be a Kansas City. I mean, I think they're just so fun. They're so entertaining to watch. I'm a huge fan of Bia. She's one of my favorite players in the league. I love watching her play and her range of capabilities and how she's kind of like salt and makes everyone else around her better. I love to watch Orlando. I've been a fan of them for so long. I love the Brazilian flair, the creativity, the joy, the smiles, and obviously the defensive effort. But yeah, I'm also excited to see what Gotham's going to be. Juan Carlos Amaros has had incredible success in this league, both at Gotham and Houston when he was there. And I'm excited to see all these new players and how he can help them gel into that controlled chaos and how long that process is going to take.
All right, Jason, your pick.
Can I go outside of the group that we talked about?
No.
Okay.
We're East Coast today.
East Coast only.
East
Okay.
Coast.
I will say I do kind of I want to see KC quite a bit. A team like Jill said with a healthy Bia added to that group, that's potentially spectacular. They were already pretty spectacular last year. It's kind of unfair that they're going to then be like, oh, and Bia might be healthy for 26 games. Yeah, them and the Spirit. I'm fascinated by how the Spirit are going to develop with Bernal. I think that's an attempt to sort of exert a little more possession and control over games and be a little less transitional. Can they find their way to that, or does it become like, this isn't working so great, and what did work great is like, let's find Rodman or Rose Kouassi or McKenna Morris in those pockets in transition where they can do what they do, because that is pretty good, it turns out. So those are the teams that I think are probably the best two from the group we talked about, and I think they also are the most interesting to me right now.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you to you both for this definitely in-depth and comprehensive look at our unofficial East Coast teams. And thanks for joining Full Time. Okay, that is the show for this week. Hopefully you enjoyed, and you can stay tuned for our preview of the NWSL West, as we're calling it, next Thursday. Plus, we've got some homework for you because Amazon Prime Video is dropping their 4-part documentary on the NWSL For the Win. That's dropping right ahead of the season, so we want you to watch it because we're going to be talking about it next week. We're already about an episode and a half in. It's a ride. 2024 was a real season. All right. Did you know that The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free, best-in-class coverage of women's sports? You can check out that hub at sports.yahoo.com/women's-sports. Again, that link will be in the show notes for you, though at this point, I will report I haven't memorized, so we've got something going for us. All right, my name is Meg Linehan. You have been listening to Full Time with me. Thank you to our guests, Jason Anderson and Jill Loydon, who, man, they were prepared. They did their homework. I love that energy. I feel more ready than ever for the NWSL season, even for me, listening to them. You can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. You can also follow our show at TA Fulltime on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Fulltime doesn't happen without podcast producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer Leah Griffin, and executive producer Emily Olson. We'll see you next Thursday.